Today I don't feel like doing anything. I just wanna lay in my bed.
Hey, I hope that's not your life's theme song, but there are some days that might be true. But for many, laziness is their most noticeable characteristic. Now we're continuing on in our unit about ancient wisdom for modern money management. This week we're going to be in session 3, looking at earn money productively out of Proverbs chapter 6, verses 6 through 11. And the point is, work isn't always easy, but it's necessary. Now, in case you didn't know, this lesson series was written by Dr. Michael Catt. He's senior pastor at Sherwood Baptist in Albany, Georgia. His church is famous for putting out those films, Courageous, Facing the Giants, Fireproof, War Room. So you have enjoyed some of the fruits of his labor. Now this Sunday, we only have 6 verses. It's verses 6 through 11 in Proverbs chapter 6. A good opening question here, I think, to get the conversation going is, what was your first job where you actually got a paycheck and had Social Security taken out? I'm not talking about cutting grass for neighbors in high school. I'm not talking about babysitting. I'm talking about a real job. Now, if your class is averaging age 40 and over, you might ask if they also remember what their starting salary was, because that's interesting to go back and see, what we thought was a good salary possibly 30 years ago, it's hardly able to live on now. Now, if you have a younger class, that might be a little bit too soon and too personal for them to share that, so you might want to avoid that just based on your class. I remember my first job was in the summers of 1978, 1979, here in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. I was a yard boy, very light maintenance for the Holiday Inn. It was, at the time, the place to stay when you came to visit in Pine Bluff. In the late 70s, our Pine Bluff Convention Center was fairly new, and we had a lot of big-name acts that would come to town. And they would either stay there, or at least their road crew would stay there. I remember the Allman Brothers were there, at least some of the crew of the Commodores. And so it was an interesting time to be at that hotel. Now, it was hard work. It's outside, humid southeast Arkansas weather in the summers. But at 16 and 17, I could take it back then. And even just getting minimum wage, it was rewarding to get that paycheck and know that I put in a hard week's work and got a reward. I got a paycheck for it. Now I'm going to read to you the passage, and it's from probably one of my favorite translations, at least right now. It's called The Voice, and it's a fairly new translation. It just kind of gives a little freshness to the text. If we read, well, let me just say there's some merit in reading your lesson and your text over and over and over in the same translation. That way you can memorize it. But oftentimes when we read with familiarity, we skip over and we know the text and we can just say it by heart, just kind of like singing songs that we know in worship service. We can sing those songs over and over and over, especially those old hymns that we know by heart, and they just sometimes lose their meaning because we've gotten committed to memory and we're just going through the motions of repeating the words. So it's kind of similar to that. So just a point you might want to do occasionally is read your lesson text in different translations. It kind of helps bring freshness to the text. It might even kind of broaden your horizon about what the text actually means. So I'm going to read to you Proverbs chapter 6, verses 6 through 11 in the Voice translation. It says, "Take a lesson from the ant, you who love leisure and ease. Observe how it works, and dare to be just as wise. It has no boss, no one laying down the law or telling it what to do. Yet it gathers food through the summer and takes what it needs from the harvest. How long do you plan to lounge your life away, you lazy fool? Will you ever get out of bed? You say, a little sleep, a little rest, a few more minutes, and a nice little nap. But soon poverty will be on top of you like a robber. Need will assault you like a well-armed warrior." Sometimes we assign certain descriptors of animals based on our observation of them, and we will assign those characteristics to people. If we see somebody that's busy all the time, we'll say they're busy as a bee or industrious as a beaver, so there are those positive descriptors. Then there's the negative side as well, like somebody who just kind of sits around all the time, reminds us of a pig in the mud. We'll say that person is as lazy as a pig in the mud. And just the name of the animal sloth infers laziness. Now in the text here that we're looking at, the writer uses the animal or the insect, the ant. Now, seldom if ever do you see just a bunch of ants hanging around doing nothing, right? No, you see them, they're always together, they're always, I know, in fact, we have a bunch of ants right outside of our garage, and they've got a streamline going one way and a streamline going back the other. They're doing something, they're always active doing stuff. They're always scurrying here and there, they're gathering food, and it's always a meaningful activity. They're not just running around doing nothing. Now, the writer tells us that the lazy person, or the sluggard, is to observe the qualities of the ant. There's a couple that stand out to me, and that one of them is self-discipline. There's no ant boss, maybe except for the queen, but there's nobody standing there by each ant saying, okay, you need to go do this, you need to go do that. There's a self-discipline that we see in the ant. No drill sergeant there to command them to do what to do. They know what to do, and they do it. It's a self-discipline. Also, the ant works for both now and for the future. The ant doesn't use up 100% of what he gathers. He has a reserve for those tough times. He works in the summer for the winter months. Now we compare that to the sluggard. The sluggard lays around, no self-discipline, won't get out of bed, and spends what little he has with no regard to the future. Now, obviously, there may even be some in your classroom that live paycheck to paycheck, that have to do that, that can't save for the future. Some people may be out of work. There are those medical bills that came about that they weren't expecting. Maybe a very low minimum wage, or maybe a little bit higher. They're just living paycheck to paycheck. And we're not talking about those people. We're talking about people who just spend what they have, leave no margin for future catastrophes or future events that might happen. Now, I have a confession to make to you. If you've ever worked in a church office, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Several of the people, I'm not even going to say many, but several of the people that we deal with benevolent needs are sluggards. Meaning they're spending more time figuring out and abusing the system than if they were to take that energy and put it into finding a job and keeping a job. They could have money to live on. Now here's my confession. I'll sometimes get a little angry. Maybe not say anything, but in my heart there's a little bit of bitterness there when I go outside and I see them getting into a car that's much nicer than what I drive. And I'm thinking, what are you doing? But anyway, if we're going to err, we are going to err on the side of being taken and being taken advantage of, as opposed to being overly stingy. And that's probably the right thing to do. But there is a fine line there about being a good steward and all that. So it's just one of those you have to call on a case-by-case basis. Now it's important to note here that rest and leisure, or that margin that we're supposed to build into our lives, rest and leisure are not the same as being lazy. We don't have to be, and we don't need to be doing something every waking moment. God wants us to have that rest or that leisure time to recharge. That's why He instituted the Sabbath, right? But like with most areas in the Christian life, there's a balance. You have too much work, you can become a workaholic, your family suffers. If you have too much leisure time, if you do too much emphasis on that area, you can become lazy and become that sluggard that the writer here of Proverbs is warning us against. Now, we in ministry have to be very careful as well, because our ministry visits in town can turn out to be opportunities to run personal errands and to run by Walmart and to pick up something, which isn't always bad, but it can turn into that's what we're doing a lot of the day. Got to be careful about that. Also in the office, oftentimes there's nobody around, there's nobody in the office, or at least in our personal office, and we can spend way too much time on social media. Now it's true, we do gather ministry information from social media sites like Facebook, because we'll learn that somebody's in the hospital or somebody had a death in the family that nobody's called and told us. So there is some value in looking at those sites, but it really can be a time waster. And I have to be very careful, because I can find myself on Facebook too much and just scrolling through the same stuff I've already looked at. So we have to be very careful with that. So ministers have to work diligently to not be accused of working that one day a week that we often are accused of. Now, if you think your pastor is like this, I'd offer you to offer him, to shadow him, to be with him that 24/7, to go to those meetings that's 2 or 3 nights a week, to get those calls in the middle of the night. And you'll see, most likely, your pastor is not a sluggard. Now, your diligence or your hard work at your job is often noticed. Remember my story about being at the Holiday Inn? In the late 70s, Holiday Inn had a program called People Pleaser, and that was kind of what they were known as, the People Pleaser hotel chain. And they had instituted a reward program for the employees called the People Pleaser of the Month. And at the time, I was the only temporary employee, because I was just employed over the summer months. I was the only temporary employee at our local Holiday Inn to receive this award. So I got a little bit of a bonus and a little plaque that I still have today. People Pleaser of the Month, Jim Monroe. Now, the reason I got this is that I was young, I was new in the work field, and I was taught that when you were hired to do a job that you had to do it. How about that? So I thought I was just doing my job, but I was recognized as going above and beyond. Now, here are some discussion questions you might want to consider for this Sunday. First off, let's say your hard work and your extra effort isn't recognized and it's not appreciated at your work, at your place of employment. Why even bother? If nobody else is going the extra mile, if the boss doesn't appreciate my extra work, why should I even bother, right? Well, throw in some New Testament verses here to help supplement your lesson. Looking at Colossians 3:23, looking at Ephesians 6:7, which basically, they both say the same thing, and that is that work at whatever you do as if you're working for God and not for a human boss. So if you keep that in mind, I'm working for God, and so I'm going to do my best. And so keep that up, and hopefully, it will get rewarded and get noticed. Also, another question you might throw out there is what's that line between saving, like the ant does? The ant saves up for the winter months. What's the fine line between saving and hoarding, right? And basically it comes down to where your trust is, right? So you put that in the back of your mind and offer that as an answer if nobody volunteers that. Well, I hope you take your Sunday school class responsibility seriously. Think of it as your job. Don't coast, guys. Don't coast in your Sunday school leader position. It takes effort. Pray for your students. You need to call, write, email, text, whatever your form of communication is, those who are absent, as well as those who are regular attenders. Those regular attenders appreciate those notes of appreciation once or twice a year. Follow up with those guests. It's not always easy, but it's rewarding. So I hope this Sunday goes very well for you. Even though we consider Sunday our day of rest, try to encourage your students not to make this song their theme song for Sundays.
Why don't we